Hello, I'm Emma from DIY with Emma, and in today's video I'm going to be showing you a whole host of tips and hacks of ways that you can save energy in your house so that you're spending less. Now on this channel I do DIY hacks, I do how-tos, and I do follow along projects, so don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any of that. Let's get started. Now this first tip will be useful for you if you have floorboards in your house that have loads of gaps in between them. When there's gaps in between them, lots of air can come up and drafts are caused throughout the house. And if you're perhaps just staying in one room to keep that room warm, you're going to be losing some of that energy through the floorboards. So you can pick up some floorboard gap filler. There's different types of options, but this one that I've picked up it's like a foam. It's kind of squishy and it comes in different widths, so if you've got particularly large gaps then you might want one that's a little bit bigger, and if your gaps are quite narrow you can buy one that is smaller. And they come with this device. It's like a wheel and you use that to push it into the gaps. Let me show you how it's done. You're going to start at one end of your floorboard and lie it along. To get it started, it can be useful to gently pull it so that it pushes into the gap. I'm just going to show you this bit here because it's the easiest bit for me to demonstrate. You gently pull it along like that. And there you can see it's gone into the gap, and that will stop any draft from coming through. Next up we have this brush tape, which as you can see is furry and is sticky on the back, and you can use this for things like taping underneath your door. This is the front door, so there's lots of cold air in the porch that's just in front of it, and by adding this tape underneath we're going to stop the air from coming through into the house. So let's measure this and do it now. So I'm just going to measure it by eye by putting it at one side of the door and then putting it across to the other. And that's where I need to cut. It should just cut with a regular pair of kitchen scissors. Now here's the fun bit, let me zoom you in. Okay, so I'm just going to get this one end started by taking the tape off ever so slightly. And you may not have loads of space underneath your door, so this could be a little bit tricky, but you just want to pop that very first bit on there. And as you go along, push it underneath the door. Ooh, it is a little bit fiddly. Continue to pull the tape, push it under. As I pulled that away, I pulled the tape off. This bit didn't film because it's a cruel, cruel world. And then just use a sharp object like a pair of scissors or a skewer just to run it under and make sure that it's stuck to the door. There you go. That's nice and secure. As you can see, that has stopped any air from coming in that very small gap at the bottom. Now you can get these in different thicknesses. You can get them for door gaps that are much more pronounced than this. Just check out the listing when you buy it. You also may have noticed when I close the door that I have this draft excluder on the back here. This is a wooden piece with this brush on the bottom, and it's screwed in using screws. You can also buy these as self-adhesive strips. so you don't even need any tools to do it. But I will, where possible, I'll attach links to all of these different products in the instructions, what is it called, in the description, so that you know what you're looking for. You can also use this same tape for the sides of your door. Again, simple and easy to apply, if you can get it started. And on the side, I would put it down the middle, like this. They come in different colours, so you can get one that closely matches your door. I'm going to chop it off about there. Do your best to make it straight. And there we have it. Perfect. Next up, let's focus on reducing drafts in windows. So in my window here, there's a very large gap where the wind comes through, and when it's very windy, my windows scream at me, which is a little bit terrifying. So I picked up this tape, which has a much shorter pile. I don't need it to be too thick, and I'm going to tape it on the window itself at the bottom here. You could also, if you wanted, attach it directly to the frame. I decided not to do this on mine, as there was already some rubber strips on the frame itself. Okay, and now that tape is secured on there, when I close the window, the gap is completely sealed. And it also reduces noise, it reduces wind, and it stops bugs getting in. And what's better is that this costs just a few pounds. The next tip is to get up and have a look in your loft. Now, you've probably heard the recommendations of insulating your loft, and if that is something that is affordable for you at the moment, it's a great thing to do to retain all of that heat. But there are some other things that you can do if having your loft insulated isn't something that you can do right this second. So let's just take a look. When it's really hot in the summer, removing your loft hatch can be a fantastic way to lose heat and to keep your house cool. But it's also a fantastic way to lose heat in the winter when you don't want that to happen. So just like the doors and the windows, you can apply this tape to stop any air from getting out in the gaps of the loft hatch. Let's go and have a look up there. Just before we do, here is the finished result of adding the tape onto the loft hatch. I don't have any light up here, so you'll just have to bear with this flashing light. So one of the first things you can do is, if you do have insulation in your loft, make sure that it's actually covering the parts that it should be. As you can see here, some bits have been removed, perhaps when this loft hatch was put in. And so I'm going to move these bits back into the gap so that heat isn't being lost. Don't forget, if you're going to be using insulation, wear gloves and wear some protective clothing, because it can be very irritating to your hands and your skin, as well as to your lungs. And this here is an example of some relatively inexpensive insulation that you can get, that you just put in between the joists. If you've ever seen a funny looking key like this before and wondered what it's for your radiators. Now, when you have a heating system, sometimes there's additional air that gets into that heating system, and when that happens, it doesn't work as efficiently and it will cost you more in energy. So I recommend about once a year doing something called bleeding your radiators, and that just removes additional air from your system. Now, each radiator that you have will have a little piece like this. I'll do a close-up in a second.
Here's that close-up, and just a note before you start, make sure that your heating system is off, unplug the boiler, and make sure your heating system has cooled down fully, otherwise you'll get very hot water coming out when you bleed it.
You can put this key on. Can you hear that? This is the air escaping the system. What you'll want to do is to keep that air coming out of the system until you start to get some water coming out. When the water starts to come out, that's when the air has completely escaped from the system and you just have the water left in there. Because you've let some air out of the system, the water pressure overall in your heating system will go down. And what you'll need to do then is to increase the pressure in your boiler, which I'll show you a little bit later. But first of all, we're just going to get all of the air out of this radiator.
Keep your eyes peeled for when the water starts to come out. You'll notice it because it actually scared me a little bit, which was quite funny.
There we go. Keep a handy towel to hand so that you aren't getting it all over your walls, because you'll also find that the water inside of your radiator smells a bit funny, because when it's filled, it's a certain compound is added to keep the insides of the radiators healthy, so it smells a bit funky. You're going to want to do this with every radiator that you have in the house.
When you've done a few, you'll start to notice that the sound changes ever so slightly as the system is emptying of the air, so you'll kind of know when it's almost ready.
Let's move on to the next one. What you're looking at here is my boiler. And if you zoom in on this lovely diagram here, this tells you what pressure is in the system. Now on my specific boiler, it's supposed to be between 1 and 2. And if I just get the manual for you, and very specifically about here, between 1 and 1.5 bar. As you can see, it's too low, and that's because I've been emptying air out of the system, so it's lost pressure. Each boiler will work slightly differently, but I will just show you how to increase the pressure in this particular boiler. Many other boilers will have a very similar system. Underneath here, we have this little piece that you can just pop out, and there's a key. We're going to take this key, we're going to battle with it until it gives up the ghost. And this gets put up here in this hole. You just give it a little bit of welly. So you push that up there, and you need to push it in where the open lock symbol is, and you turn it slightly to the right so that it says that it's closed. And then you turn this little button, this little turn, to in a clockwise position. And you can hear, let me get this closer, the sounds of water going into the system. And whilst that's happening, you're going to want to open this back up. And you can watch as the bars increase.
It won't take too long for it to fill. I've just zoomed this part up for you so that you can see the bar moving, but it will be a little bit slower than this.
And once that reaches the right place, as you'll recall, it's between 1 and 2. And now it's in the right place. You want to close that back up anti-clockwise. And just focus. This needs to go back now to the open lock position. And you'll probably notice when you take this out, a little bit of water will come out with it, but that's normal. Ooh, that took quite a bit of pulling. There we go, there's a bit of water I mentioned. So now the pressure has increased. If you have quite a lot of air in your system, you might need to do this a couple of times, because once the pressure is reduced, it doesn't have enough pressure in the system to push out the air. So I've just released the air from a couple of radiators. I'm going to go and do a couple more and come back down and see what the pressure's like yet again. I bled the rest of the radiators. They were pretty much fine anyway, but it did reduce the system pressure just a little bit. So I'm going to go back and top it up with the key just a small amount, and then I'm going to put the key back and I'll be done. You might notice that your radiators need bleeding. If, for example, the top half of your radiator is cold and the bottom is warm, that's a sure sign that it needs to be bled.
Another sign that you might need to bleed your radiators is if you can hear like gurgling and all of the bubbles moving through the system.
So here's some ideas about how to make the best use of the energy that you do have in your house. If you've got your heating on, think about moving your sofa to a different location if it's in front of the radiator. When you have a piece of furniture like this in front of the radiator, it stops the heat from moving around the room. I'm going to move this to a different part of the room. I quite like it here, so I'll probably move it back in summer, but this way I'll be able to make the best use of the heat that I do have in this room. It can also be a really good idea to close the doors of the room that you're in. If you don't use all of your house, you can close the door and you can just turn the radiators on in that one room. You don't have to heat the entire house. Another tip can be to buy thicker and heavier curtains. Obviously, curtains are not the cheapest thing to buy, so perhaps waiting until the next time that you're buying curtains to take this tip on board. But if you buy something that is thicker and heavier, when you close these curtains, they're going to be keeping a lot of that heat in. It's also worth mentioning that a lot of us have curtains that go to the floor and they sit in front of radiators. Let me show you. Now that I've closed that curtain, all of that heat is being kept inside of that window recess, and we really want it to be moving around the room. So what I like to do is just pick the curtains up and pop them on the windowsill. I usually move my plants first because this isn't going to work with the plants on there. But yeah, if you close those, you're just keeping all of that heat out of circulating in the rest of the room. Getting an energy meter is also a really great way to work out how much heat, how much electricity you're using every day. And to add to this, you can also buy a device that plugs into your sockets that you can put a plug into to work out how much a specific device is costing you. For example, say you think that your tumble dryer might be costing you quite a lot of money. You can put that device, I don't have one otherwise I would show you, into the plug socket and then put the plug into that, and then it records how much is being used. So you can have an overall view, and you can also find out per appliance how much it's costing you. You might have a panel for your home heating system that looks a little bit like this. And more often than not, you're able to set timers on the system so that it can come on in certain parts of the day. For example, I might turn this off at night whilst I'm asleep, and you need your body temperature to be lower anyway, and set it to start heating the house perhaps an hour or two before you wake up, so that you don't have to suffer too much in that first moment of taking the sheets off and starting the day. So don't forget to use your timer. It's a great way to use as little heat as possible, and you don't have to have it on all day and all night. You're going to get the most out of appliances that are working efficiently. So like your boiling system, where you might want to bleed the air out of the radiators, it's also a good idea to get your boiler serviced frequently. Another thing you can do is to defrost your freezer, because it's surprising how much additional ice in the freezer area costs you an additional energy. I need to do something about that.
If you found any part of this video helpful, please do consider subscribing and stay to the end of the video to not miss the bloopers. It's time for the bloopers.
Oh, it's not supposed to happen. Another useful tip is to buy curtains are not the cheapest thing to buy.